We are having another wonderful episode of Healing Her Halo. I'm super excited to introduce Natalia Rachel. She's a trauma informed therapist, award winning L&D educator, human intelligence consultant, Penguin Random House author, global keynote speaker, 3 times founder, and social entrepreneur. Board member and peacemaker, Natalia helps us understand how to heal and co create a more kind, intelligent, and equitable world. Natalia, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh my God. And you're in Sydney, Australia right now?
Opposite end of the earth to where you are.
So, what time is it over there right now?
It is now 1 p.m. It's lunchtime.
Okay. So it's nighttime over here, based out of Florida. So, well, thank you so much for your time today. So, I definitely want to jump right in. I think this is going to be an amazing conversation. I first off, I do want to know, what does a human intelligence consultant do?
A lot of my work is about understanding the human experience and human behavior and dynamics and relationships, both in the context of trauma and in the context of healing. And this work is very intersectional. So when I work as a consultant, it might be around people and culture, but it might be around communication and marketing strategy. It might be around ecosystem building, because I guess the way that we're showing up as humans and all of the stuff we carry trickles into and affects every dimension of our complex world.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, in the context to even marketing, because I feel like the ability to tell your story is such a powerful skill to have today, and especially being able to do so in a digital way. But how do you bring that trauma informed approach to the social space, the marketing space? What's your work there?
There are so many of us that have lived through trauma that are aching for a space to share our story and looking for a space to be heard. But sometimes that very meaningful and personal intention may not actually be helpful for the people that are listening, whether that is an audience or a community or people that are members of an organization. And so learning how to share in ways that express key stories and key themes and key ideas without, I guess, unloading our trauma is a really important distinction. And and similarly, if we're wanting to speak to people that have gone through a lot of trauma, and trauma alters our perceptive pathways, it alters the way we take in information. We can learn to communicate in ways that, bypass the trauma isn't the right word, but consider the trauma and how those people may be hearing, may be perceiving, may be taking in words. So much of the relational or systemic distress we have in the world is because the way one person or one group is speaking is not heard in the way the message is intended. And so a trauma informed approach to communication really bridges that gap. So we don't speak, we speak to be heard.
That's really powerful. We don't speak, we speak to be heard. Wow.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of work to get to that point where it's even possible to do that, because that's when it becomes my voice isn't about me anymore. My voice is about connection, dynamics, humanity. And that's where our healing becomes social. And it's a tipping point that I think more and more of us are getting to. And it's really important for us individually, but also as a collective, as a humanity.
Wow. Okay. And let's say if we're having an issue with that gap of communication, what are some things that we can do to improve in the way that we communicate with each other, especially people who've experienced trauma, or maybe you didn't experience trauma, and maybe you're a service provider providing a service to people who have. What are some key things that we should know?
I guess it depends where, if you're coming from the place of the person who is speaking and sharing, or the person who is receiving. So let's start with if we're receiving. Um, when we've gone through trauma, it's really common that we perceive through the lens of threat, or the lens of persecution, or the lens of inequity. or the lens of harm or violation or of boundary breach. And sometimes it's a sort of kaleidoscope of many of these things. And so it can be really helpful for us to more deeply understand what lenses we tend to experience through and what they feel like in the body. And so that's where somatics starts to play a really important role. So, for example, when I'm coming from place of feeling violated or deprived or not treated equally, I will feel differently. I will experience differently. And if I can identify, oh, I'm experiencing or I'm receiving information through a lens, all of a sudden that lens may not come down, but maybe I can put it to the side and maybe I can sort of witness my experience that is altered rather than be in my experience that is altered. And so this goes really deep and it can get really nuanced. If we're not able to get to that level, we can come a level sort of more simpler, which would be, am I experiencing through a lens of threat or through a lens of safety, through a lens of disharmony or through a lens of harmony? And this is a really good point of departure in kind of just starting to fine tune and question the way we're receiving messages. If we are the one giving the messages or speaking the messages, it's really important to understand the potential trauma narratives or the lenses that the person or the people we're speaking to may be holding. We want to make sure we're not ignoring them, but we want to also make sure we're not playing into them. And unfortunately, I see a lot of this in the marketing space or any place where we're trying to convince any kind of debate, you know. A lot of people or persons of influence will actually know that lens and play into it. Because when we're experiencing through lenses, we are more disempowered. We're not connected to our sense of power in the world. We're surviving, we're reacting. And so if we want to be sort of a conscious trauma-informed communicator, we want to understand, well, what would be the lenses that this person or these people are experiencing through, and how can I actually bring them out of that and bring them to a place of harmony, bring them to a place of safety, bring them to a place of being seen, of being validated. And again, the more deeply we go into this work, the more complex and nuanced it can become. There's a lot of mastery in learning how to communicate in ways that heal rather than harm. And that is a lot of what my work is about.
Wow, thank you so much for your work that you're doing. I think that's incredible. I think what you just shared is, I would say, one of the most powerful pieces of advice we've ever received on this show.
Thank you.
The
I'm so pleased to hear that.
how you broke it down, just the lenses and the different filters that we could see, life through or receive information through, it really does color, our feelings and our emotions. And it may not even be, the intent of the other person to maybe not connect in a certain way, but maybe it is that lens that we're looking through and receiving through. So how did you get to this point of awareness of the study of work? Was this something that you had to journey through on your own? Is this something that you were interested in studying? How did you get here?
Gosh, it's been a complex, non-linear journey and it continues, as is the path of healing for all of us. I mean, I think I used to be one of the most traumatized people I've ever met, really. I've lived through so much, and people often don't believe it when they first meet me or when they connect to my work online or, as a teacher. But really, I've lived through some of the worst things and I was so altered and I was so fragmented. And I really had to figure out, why am I experiencing like this? Why does it feel like the world is full of perpetrators? Why does it feel like there's no support and that I'm all alone? Why am I feeling violated all of the time? And so it was this deep inquiry, and I've always been this very curious person and had a strong, I guess, internal witness, or I call it the conscious healing self. So absolutely there was so much personal inquiry and study, not just through the lens of psychology and psychotherapy, but through the lens of spirituality, and many other healing modalities too, neuroscience, qigong, somatics, you name it. I wanted to look through it. And I think over time, I developed what I call this kaleidoscope, where I could sort of see through all of these lenses of healing that then illuminated all of the traumatized lenses that I was holding. And slowly I learned to bring them down one by one. And when I moved into working as a therapist, and then a clinic director, over many, many years, I worked with so many people from all over the world because at the time I was based in Singapore there was just people from every continent in the world coming to see me. And so I started to tune into what are the core lenses that people are holding. And really, even though trauma presented differently through different people with different stories and from different places, there were these sort of core lenses that were common. And so I sort of developed this model for learning how to identify these lenses or these particular triggers, so that we can learn to take them off for ourselves. But more importantly, if we are in a position of power, if we are in service, we can learn when somebody is seeing through one of those lenses and try and help them take it off and speak to them beyond it rather than through it.
That's so beautiful to speak to them beyond it instead of through it. I and I know you have a book. Why am I like this? And it sounds like part of your story. It just the title of your book just came up in my mind. Can you just take us through what your book is about? And I know that it was launched recently with Penguin Random House. Congratulations! That's incredible.
Thank you. So the book is called Why Am I Like This? Illuminating the Traumatized Self. And it shares everything I understand about healing from trauma, both from a personal perspective and a professional perspective. So you can consider it me a patient turned therapist. Um, and the book has a number of different parts. The first part of the book is really understanding trauma from more of an existential and human perspective, and that those ways that we are altered, and the things that we are lacking and the things that we need in order to heal. Um, and the very last part of the book is called The Laws of Peace and Power. And it's kind of like the spiritual rules that I live by and that I believe if we all tune into, we can walk this earth in a way where we can feel well and healing, but we can also ensure that we're contributing to other people's wellness and their healing, and not that there's this common thing that I see happening where sometimes our healing comes at the cost of somebody else and then nobody is really healing. So it's how do we walk the world from a place of embodiment? And every chapter of the book shares, I guess, a philosophy or an idea, as well as a personal story where I kind of lived and learned. And then there are self inquiry questions to help you tune into this piece in your world, as well as a somatic meditation or exercise. So you can really start to get into the body and feel like a shift. Because one of the things that's really common with trauma is, we're doing all this left brain cognitive thinking and we're kind of understanding all of the stuff, but the feeling hasn't changed. The felt sense hasn't changed. The dynamic experience of the world hasn't changed. So I wanted to add in this somatic piece to really help people come home to the body, because it's here that we can best unearth the trauma and also integrate the healing.
That's amazing. Oh my God. So there are different exercises, like meditative exercises in the book. And I love that so much. And I know you said there were a few different principles that you shared just from a spiritual perspective on how you can walk well. So if you could share just one, maybe one principle from your book that may help us walk well.
The biggest thing I think right now is learning to live within our capacity. So when we're living in our capacity, we'll sense all is well and I have enough. There is enough. And when we're living beyond our capacity, we will sense threat, chaos, danger, and there is not enough. And so that's when we scramble, that's when we go into survival. And so we are unable to heal from trauma if we are living beyond our capacity. And it's really hard when we think about it in the context of this world, because our world is constantly yelling at us and asking us to live beyond our capacity, to do more, be better, earn more, climb, get more awards, and raise up the top of this invisible mountain. Um, and it's quite a trap for everybody. No one's exempt from the trap. And so learning to tune into when am I not only at my capacity, but when am I a little bit before my capacity? And can I stop? And there's something really powerful that happens when we stop just before we reach capacity. is that a lot of the shame and fear that we hold will rise to the surface for us to metabolize. So we are not moving from fear and we are not moving from shame. And in the book, I write quite a bit about how fear and shame are these blocker emotions that are almost keeping our deep seated trauma down. So if we can come back to living within our capacity, we'll be forced to metabolize that fear, forced to metabolize that shame, and it will be then that we can go deeper.
Wow. Thank you. Just thank you so much for your time today. And just want to take a moment to just spotlight and highlight how knowledgeable you are. Um, every single word, every single piece of advice that you've given so far has just been so detailed and actionable, of just a mindset shift, a perspective shift that you could apply right now. And I think when people, especially, I would say women especially, when we're going through just the ebbs and flows of the healing journey, because like you said, it's not a linear journey, it's ups and downs, it's round and round sometimes, and it feels like we're in a complete scramble. um, but just to have some actionable advice, that we can use in the moment to just reconceptualize how we're viewing our world. It's so powerful, and I know that what you're saying right now is going to save lives. I absolutely know it. Thank you. So I read a part of your story about you receiving a misdiagnosis. And I did want to ask you a few more details about that, because I do think that, in a couple conversations ago, a couple episodes ago, we sort of touched on how sometimes the medical industry isn't always compassionate, and trauma informed. So, can you just share a little bit about your story in regards to that and how you were able to, I would say, overcome that misdiagnosis?
Mm-hmm. So, I grew up in a lot of trauma, and of course, it has this rolling effect and it decontextualizes in all these diffuse ways. And I think when I was younger, I just sucked it down, I dissociated, I hid in my room, and I tried to do really well at school. So I was kind of like coping. And then when I was around sort of 16, 17, I couldn't hold it in anymore. It just sort of like started leaking or exploding. And the way it showed up then was I was no longer interested in being a straight A student. I was like, screw this. And I started speaking back to my parents. I was not going to be quiet anymore when I was spoken down to, or yelled at or shamed. And that resulted in being marched to the doctor's office. Something's wrong with her, make her better. And I was given to start with an antidepressant, just a garden variety antidepressant, and it triggered a manic reaction in me. And so I went a little bit crazy. And so I was then referred to a psychiatrist who, on the first visit, told me that I had bipolar disorder and prescribed me a triple cocktail of meds, which I took because, I'm 17, I don't know any better, and I'm feeling kind of cray cray. So I got this label and I got this meds, and he proceeded to just sort of leave the prescription with his receptionist every month. So there wasn't really any exploration. And I just accepted what the doctors told me. And when we're going through a scary time and when we don't feel in control of ourselves, and certainly when we're young, we will believe what authority tells us and we will do what authority tells us to do. Um, and so I did. And I guess the meds made me even crazier than ever. I ended up leaving home and having a really awful 4 years, experiencing both physical and sexual abuse, and just like traveling so far away from the woman who I am. But when I was 21, a little voice inside me, my spirit, my consciousness spoke to me and said, Natalia, this is not your life. Do something. And so I checked into a rehab facility voluntarily and I detoxed off the meds. And it was awful. Like, I really went to deeply suicidal spaces during the detox. But out the other side, I was diagnosis free, and the doctors gave me their stamp of approval and were like, oops, our bad. You seem to be fine now. Go live your life. And I did. I didn't want to dwell on, there was a lot of people in my circles, my family, my friends, that were really quite angry about this misdiagnosis. And I was like, I've lost 4 years of my life. I just want to get on with it. And so I did, and I got a great job, I got engaged, I got a great apartment, but the trauma had not been addressed. I'd just been taken off the meds that were causing this manic reaction, this crazy reaction. And so a couple of years later, the trauma started showing up in my body. And it became very severe. So the first thing that happened was my gut shut down. And then all of a sudden, one day I was at my desk and my right foot just dropped and I couldn't move it. And at the hospital, they said I had nerve damage and I would never walk again. And I guess that began the physical health misdiagnosis. The doctors didn't know what was happening to me. And they just sort of gave me diagnosis after diagnosis, which didn't fit, more and more meds, pain meds, prednisone, steroids, OxyContin, all of these meds. And I guess it just got worse and worse. And again, I just believed that I had some mystery disease. And the doctor said, if the medication that we're giving you and the treatments that we're giving you, because in the last few years they put me on these weird intravenous treatments, they said, if all this medication doesn't kill you, if all your illness doesn't kill you, the medication you're taking will kill you. And they told me that I'd be dead by the time I was 40. And I just believed them for a time. So the trauma had been trying to speak since I was a teenager. It was trying to speak through my mental health and through my social engagements. And then when that was kind of all shut down, it started to speak through my body. And the only way that I could heal was to actually exit the medical system. And this is not advice for anybody experiencing similar to do the same. It's absolutely not advice. It's just my journey. But it was exploring the lens of somatics and a safety versus threat paradigm, and learning about my nervous system and the dynamic relational aspect of trauma that allowed me to process and heal. And so I had this miraculous, very quick actually journey in terms of healing my health. But the relational systemic piece to build a life of peace and power took many, many years. And so there are millions of people living today with diagnosis, whether they are mental health, whether they are physical health. And I question the paradigm of pathology that we live in that says you are a problem and symptoms equal diagnosis. And what I would love to see, and we are slowly moving towards it, is a paradigm of inquiry, of system inquiry, where we question what is happening in your nervous system, how safe or threatened are you feeling, and why might that be the case, whether that is now, whether that is earlier in your life, or whether that is intergenerationally, because so many of us are carrying intergenerational trauma from the last couple of generations too. And if we are, we think that we're crazy. And the current medical paradigm tells us that we're crazy, which propels us back into the cycle of re-traumatization. So we've got a lot of work to do, but having been in this field for a decade now, I do see incredible change happening. But deep systemic transformation is always slow, but it's happening.
Wow. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Just, I know that journey is never completely finished. We're always on an en route to this better, more refined, more aware version of ourselves. So, just whatever you had to go through in this moment to share that story with us, we appreciate you. We thank you. And the somatic part of your healing journey, it sounds like that was the most pivotal moment and breakthrough. What was that moment like when you were, I would say, maybe doing your first couple exercises and you felt a shift or you felt some inkling of hope that there is another or alternative way to go about your healing journey? What was that moment like, or do you remember?
So actually, it happened in a really unsafe way. And this is also the case for many people that are on their healing journey. I had gone for some acupuncture and some body work. And the practitioner, who was very well meaning but not trauma informed, could kind of sense some of the trauma in my abdomen. And a lot of practitioners are very sensory and very intuitive and can sense where something may be held. But he took it upon himself to get it out of me. So he plunged his hands into my abdomen without consent, without really knowing what he was doing. And the moment he sort of pushed his hands into my abdomen, I regressed. And I regressed to experiences of being physically abused. And because I didn't know what was going on, and because I didn't really feel safe in the dynamic, I didn't say anything. I just froze and I suppressed it. And then when the session finished, I ran out onto Orchard Road, which is this like really busy road in Singapore. And I just started crying and crying and crying, and all of these sort of memories were going through my mind, and I could not calm down. And I emailed him and I'd said, this is happening, and he didn't really know what to do. But that was the moment where I realized, oh, the trauma is in my body. The stories are in my body. And so I took it upon myself. And again, this is not something I suggest for others, but it was my unique path to start feeling into, well, what else is there? If that memory was there, what else am I holding inside? And so I sort of developed this very crude, intuitive process of like lying on my bed and feeling into my body. And I would tune in through emotion, like what emotion am I holding here? What emotion am I holding here? And then the story would come and the emotion would come, and I would writhe around and I would cry. And I started doing it for about 4 hours a day, which again, I do not suggest. But there was release and the physical symptoms started to disappear. I had a lot of bruising, I had a lot of swelling, I had a lot of pain, and it all went. And at the end of 4 months of doing this process, I was symptom free. And I'd also at the same time started detoxing against medical advice off the medications that I was on. And so at the other end, I was symptom free and I was diagnosis free. And all of these people around me who sort of were watching, like, how did you do that? Can you help me? Because I'm living through something similar. And I said, well, I think I can, but let me go study. And so that's when I enrolled to start my studies, which spanned many, many, many different modalities. And the way that I teach therapists somatics now sort of initially stems from that personal experience. But of course, I've learned how to make it so much safer, so much more considered, and very relational. So I do not recommend to anybody listening to try and do it yourself at home. Having said that, I also know that finding a great trauma-informed somatic therapist is not easy or accessible for everyone, and that's what the book's for. The book is to help you start to tune in ways that are really safe, really slow, really considered.
What a revolutionary you are. This
Oh,
is amazing. You basically miraculously healed yourself from all of the things that you were dealing with and going through, and you were given tons and tons and tons of medication that were only making the situation worse, and you just took the time to go within yourself and say, let me spend time with me. And you said 4 hours. And for you, and again, like you said, like this isn't necessarily a piece of advice for you to go take it and run with it, but just to learn from the fact of going inward and trusting your own internal voice of what you need in that moment to help you move forward on your healing journey. I think that's so powerful. And do you offer any sort of program or any sort of coaching?
yeah, I mean, I work as a therapist. I see clients online, but I see very few these days. And I have a team of therapists in Singapore who have trained with me who also work with people healing from trauma. And then I teach a professional development training for therapists, coaches, practitioners who would like to support others in this work. So I've been teaching that for 9 years now. And I just go slowly and sustainably. The next ones are actually in LA in February 2025 and in Singapore in March 2025. And as part of learning how to facilitate it, you've kind of got to go through it yourself. And then I teach a program for parents, and then I like how to not pass their trauma onto their children called Trauma Informed Parent. And And I also have online a few sort of short online courses and workshops. So if you're interested in doing the somatic piece, I did film sort of a workshop series that takes you through all of the practices that are in the book to sort of really help and be a companion. So I do try to let this work travel to many different people in many different places and meet people where they are on their journey of healing.
Thank you so much for just sharing the information, giving us the details of how we can get connected with you, and just stay a part of any of the teaching that you have going on. Because I think the most powerful part of your story, and you have so many powerful parts of your story, but when someone asked you if you could help me do this for themselves, and you said, let me go study first. Just your approach of how you interacted, you could have said, you know what, yeah, let's try it out, let's figure something out, and put the cart before the horse. And maybe, like you said, sometimes people end up harming when they might have very well intent to heal, but they just end up harming. But the attention that you took to educate yourself and figure out how to do this in a way that's going to make sure that people are going to be healed and people are going to get the help that they need. I think that's so admirable, because I don't think a lot of people would do the same thing or take the same, level of caution. And we need more leaders like you.
I think there's this point that a lot of us get to on our healing journey where we've learned all these things and we've had this big shift for ourselves and we're like, I want to help other people heal now. I'm stepping into service. And it's this really beautiful, powerful moment. And we need people with lived experience in service. But we also need to make sure we take the time to learn how to serve safely and how to not serve from our unfinished wounding, which all of us carry. All of us who have gone through trauma and step into service all hold the archetype of the wounded healer. And we need to keep that in check and we need to keep healing. Me too, like all of us have it. And so continued personal and professional development, continued working with supervisors or group mentoring is really important to make sure we are embodied, and that we really are contributing to other people's healing and not sort of stuck in another loop of projecting or leaking onto the world.
Or linking onto the world. I think that's so profound. Oh my gosh. Okay. I don't think there's any other way that I could have like tried to articulate that. So I'm just so grateful that you put those words together and vocalized that point in such a poignant way. So if there's anything at all that you could share with a woman right now who's going through, let's say she's in a deep low right now. I mean, she's trying to pull herself up. I mean, she's as low as the ground at this point. And vibrationally, she's just trying to scrape by. What could you say to her to help put a spark back into her halo?
In the context of trauma and everything you've lived through and everything you've unconsciously learned, you make perfect sense. There's nothing wrong with you. Yeah, I think we need to take that moment where we shift from shame to self compassion. And when we externalize the dysfunction, I am not the problem. I'm hurting because things either happened to me that were not okay or are happening to me that were not okay, or that I didn't receive the resources that I needed to be okay. Because it's not just about being harmed, it's about being neglected or not supported as well. So, in the context of all of that, you make perfect sense.
Just taking a minute. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And if we want to stay connected with you, where can we go to connect with you?
So I'm pretty prolific sharing on LinkedIn nearly every day, also on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel, and then there's my website, nataliarachel.com, and that also has my learning portal on there with all of my both in person and online courses too.
Natalia, thank you so much for joining this show. We absolutely love and adore you, and I cannot wait for everybody to hear this episode of Healing Her Halo.
Thank you so much.